Hello, could you help me grow this channel? Subscribing is totally free. Just one click below this video is all it takes.
New Year's Eve was always a production at my mother's house. She planned it like she was hosting the damn Emmys. Catered food she couldn't pronounce, signature cocktails with rosemary sprigs no one wanted, and guests that always managed to look more polished than joyful. I used to think she did it for the tradition, for the family memories, or something sentimental like that. But at some point, I realized it wasn't about the new year at all. It was about the performance, the image, the lights, the people she could impress. And this year, I was only there because my dad had called me 3 times to make sure I'd show. "For your sister," he said. "She's had a big year." Claire had always had big years. This one was no different. So there I was, standing next to the ornamental fireplace with a champagne flute in one hand, and my other resting casually on my laptop bag. I hadn't taken my coat off yet. Honestly, I hadn't decided if I'd even stay through dessert. Claire was glowing in a silver dress, the kind that clung to all the right places. Her husband Jason stood beside her, half buzzed already, talking to one of the neighbors about his new dental practice. I caught snippets. State-of-the-art, full orthodontic suite, 12-month wait list. It was always the same script with them. Reliable, predictable, polished. Then Mom tapped her glass with the back of a knife, gently, like she was summoning spirits. Everyone quieted. "Before we do the countdown," she said, smiling like she was preparing to drop something profound, "I just want to take a moment to raise a glass to someone who really went above and beyond this year." I already knew. I felt it in my chest, in the way her eyes didn't even flicker toward me. "To Claire," she continued, lifting her flute, "for getting that amazing promotion, managing the house like a pro, and just, well, being the one who actually made something of herself." Laughter, genuine, careless laughter. Claire giggled and did that thing where she waves her hand like, "Oh, stop." But we all knew she was soaking in it like sunlight. The air around me felt like it tightened. No one looked in my direction. No one had to. They all knew. Now, I've always had this rule. When they underestimate you, when they push you aside like you're just filler in the background of someone else's highlight reel, you don't scream. You don't beg for the spotlight. You let it burn a little, then you show them. Quietly, decisively, permanently. I smiled, and it wasn't fake, but it wasn't warm either. I stood up, walked slowly to the TV on the wall, took out my laptop, and connected the HDMI. The screen blinked black, then the stream loaded. NASDAQ's live broadcast. Bright lights, a crowd, camera flashes. And then there it was, my company's name, scrolling across the bottom with a small live icon glowing red in the corner. No one was laughing anymore. You see, 6 years ago, I quit my job. Walked out of a pretty decent marketing firm with no backup plan, no support. My boss thought I was having a mental breakdown. Maybe I was. All I knew was that I had this idea, an AI scheduling tool that learned how people actually worked, not how they said they wanted to work. I poured everything into it, every dollar, every vacation day, every relationship. And today, after 6 years of pitching, failing, rebuilding, chasing crumbs from VCs, and surviving on cold pizza and bad coffee, today, on New Year's Eve, it was going public. Claire's face had gone pale. Mom still held her glass midair, frozen like a statue. Jason whispered something under his breath. I didn't look at them. I just turned up the volume. The announcer's voice filled the room. "We are moments away from one of the most anticipated IPOs of the quarter as WorkNest prepares to debut under the symbol RKN. Early estimates are already exceeding expectations." The number popped up. My number. The valuation, over 400 million. I didn't say a word. People were staring at me like I just ripped the mask off and revealed someone they didn't know was standing among them all along. And maybe I had. Maybe for too long I'd let them think I was just coasting through life, dabbling in tech stuff, playing grown-up with my little startup. That was the narrative they preferred after all. Easier than acknowledging I'd built something real, something big. Mom finally cleared her throat. What is this?" I turned to her. "This," I said, is what I've been working on while you were too busy bragging about Claire's Pinterest board weddings and Jason's office renovations. This is my year. You could hear a pin drop, and then the ticker changed again. The opening price shot up another 7%. My phone buzzed. It was my co-founder texting. We did it. They're calling us the breakout of the year. I looked around the room, saw their faces. Not angry, not proud, just confused. Like they didn't know what to do with this version of me. The one who didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't wait for applause. I poured myself another drink, raised my glass, not high, just enough, and said quietly, "Here's to the one who actually made something of herself." No one toasted. No one moved. And that's when I knew the real show was just beginning. It's strange how the things that shape us most don't come all at once in some grand cinematic moment, but arrive in pieces. Tiny, forgettable fragments we don't recognize until we look back and realize they built everything we became. For me, it started in the fluorescent glow of a coffee shop off 5th Street, with a lukewarm espresso and a cheap spiral notebook filled with ideas no one but me believed in. I just quit my job, a stable, decent-paying marketing position at a firm that never really cared whether I was brilliant or invisible, so long as the reports hit the inbox on time and the Monday stand-ups weren't interrupted by questions that didn't serve the status quo. I didn't quit because I had something better lined up. I quit because I couldn't stomach another year, no, another week, watching my life drip away into PowerPoint slides and brand briefs that would never matter to anyone in 10 months, let alone 10 years. That decision didn't go over well with my family. My mom, in particular, didn't hide her horror. She said things like, "You're throwing away stability, Tom. And women your age should be thinking about mortgages and families, not apps and late-night code sprints." She called it a phase, a rebellion, a tantrum dressed up as ambition. My dad, quieter by nature, just asked me once, over dinner when we were alone, "You sure you know what you're doing, Nat?" And when I said yes, he didn't press, but I saw the worry in his eyes, like he was preparing for the fallout before the storm had even arrived. The fallout came quickly. The savings I thought would stretch 6 months barely made it to 4. My first prototype was embarrassingly bad, clunky, slow, ugly, and when I showed it to a developer friend from college, he laughed and said, "I've seen middle school projects run smoother." I stayed up for 2 days straight after that, rewriting the logic, watching YouTube tutorials at half speed, and crying into my keyboard at 4 in the morning, wondering if I'd already made the worst decision of my life. But I kept going, not because I thought I was special or because I had some mystical faith that it would all work out, but because I knew I couldn't go back. That was the truth no one ever wanted to hear. Going back would have meant confirming all their worst assumptions, that I didn't have what it took, that I was playing at being an entrepreneur, that women like me, scrappy, unpolished, emotionally driven, don't win at games this rigged. I moved into a tiny studio apartment above a dry cleaner that always smelled like burnt starch. The walls were thin, the heater rattled like a dying lawnmower, and the Wi-Fi only worked if I stood next to the bathroom door. But it was mine. I set up a desk beside the window, propped my whiteboard against the closet, and made that room my war zone. For nearly 2 years, I lived off granola bars, gas station coffee, and an unhealthy volume of optimism mixed with just enough rage to keep me from quitting. I took freelance gigs that paid next to nothing just to cover the electricity bill. I lost friends, good ones, because I stopped returning calls and missed birthday dinners. I let go of a man who said he loved me but couldn't understand why I'd choose a server stack over Sunday brunch. There were nights I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, and mornings I couldn't remember what day it was. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was actually building something that belonged to me. I launched the first real beta version of Work Nest almost a year after I quit. It was still rough around the edges, but it functioned. It predicted optimal scheduling windows based on behavioral inputs, user patterns, and work fatigue cycles. I ran tests with strangers online, took every bit of feedback personally, and fixed what I could. One review called it a glorified planner, and another said it felt like a therapy app without the therapy. But buried in all that noise were a few voices that said, This made my week easier, and I finally finished a project on time. That was enough. That was fuel. I started pitching investors, not the glossy Silicon Valley ones with rooftop offices and lattes on tap, but the small, scrappy kind that sat in the back of co-working spaces, sipping burnt coffee and pretending not to care. I failed. A lot. Pitches fell flat. One investor told me to find a male co-founder to give it some credibility. Another asked if I'd consider making it more lifestyle-driven, as in pretty colors and vague affirmations, not data science and algorithms. I smiled through it, then I rewrote my pitch deck, again and again, until I had a version that made people stop checking their phones halfway through. It was around this time that Claire reached out. She'd heard from Dad, who'd heard from Mom, who'd apparently seen my LinkedIn update about securing a pilot program with a regional consulting firm. Claire asked if I wanted to grab lunch. I said yes, mostly out of curiosity. She wore a blazer and perfect makeup and asked thoughtful questions like someone reading a script titled, "How to Support Your Creative Sister." Then, near the end, she offered me a small loan. Nothing huge, just a few thousand. "It's not charity," she said. "I believe in you. I just want to help." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to accept, to take the weight off for even a moment. Another part, the larger part, remembered all the times she'd laughed when Mom rolled her eyes at my project. So I did something unexpected. I told her yes, but under one condition. It would be a proper loan with paperwork, repayment terms, and a return rate. No exceptions. Claire blinked. I think she was surprised I'd push for formality, but she agreed. That night, I looked at the contract I'd drafted and felt something shift. It wasn't about the money. It was about rewriting the rules, on my terms. I had played nice long enough. It was time to own what I was building fully, loudly, and without apology. Because the truth was, I hadn't gambled everything to make my mother proud or prove my sister wrong. I had done it because, deep down, I knew I wasn't built for safety nets. I was built for fire. And the flames were just getting started. In every journey where the stakes climb slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, there comes a moment when the emotional weight of the risk begins to eclipse the excitement of the ambition, when you start to realize that your dreams are no longer just yours, that they've been tethered to the people around you, sometimes by threads you never intended to tie, and sometimes by knots you thought you cut long ago. For me, that moment came on an unseasonably hot spring morning, 4 months after Claire had signed the loan agreement and transferred the funds to my business account. A gesture that, on paper, looks supportive and clean, but in reality, came with an unspoken price tag I didn't fully understand until much later. At the time, the money seemed like a blessing, a brief reprieve from the constant budgeting nightmares that had become second nature to me. No more deciding between renewing the cloud services license or paying for ad space. No more skipping meals to save up for a new UX audit. No more calling in favors from engineers who could only lend me their time between gigs. I used the money wisely, or at least I thought I did. I rebuilt the onboarding process, redesigned the interface to reduce user friction, and hired a part-time operations manager who knew how to translate my chaotic energy into actual timelines. My small team, then just 3 of us working out of my apartment living room, started to hit real milestones. Monthly active users began creeping upward. Feedback became more precise and positive. And by early June, we landed a second pilot program with a mid-size accounting firm that agreed to use WorkNest for their Q2 time management trial. But while the business was finally gathering traction, something about Claire's involvement began to feel heavier, like a shadow that followed every win. At first, it was small comments in group chats, proud to be a micro-investor in my sister's empire, or jokes during dinner with friends like, "I'm still waiting for my dividend check, Nat," said with a smile, always with that tone that was somehow half supportive and half possessive. Then came the questions, gentle at first, but increasingly loaded. How's cash flow? You thinking about a buyout soon? Have you considered pivoting to enterprise clients instead of these small trials? I tried to brush it off, telling myself she meant well, that she was just excited to be part of something outside her own picture-perfect world of client meetings and curated motherhood. But then Mom started chiming in, and that's when I understood what was really happening. "Claire tells me you've been burning through cash pretty fast," she said one evening over the phone, as though discussing a broken dishwasher, not my life's work. "Are you sure you're ready for a launch? Maybe it's time to scale back, regroup, find something safer, that word again. Always circling back to safety, as though that were the measure of a life well lived." I knew what had happened. Claire had become my unofficial spokesperson to the rest of the family, and in doing so, had taken ownership of part of my narrative, the way you might claim partial credit for a group project you only half understood. And while I appreciated the money, I started to see that taking it had given her more than a stake in the business. It had given her a seat at the table she hadn't earned. So I decided to fix that. I reached out to a corporate attorney recommended by a founder I'd met at a tech meetup. We sat in a stuffy downtown office surrounded by framed diplomas and floor-to-ceiling law books, and I laid out the terms I wanted. Repayment within 18 months, standard interest, no voting rights, no equity, and a full exit clause if the company went public or received a Series B valuation. The lawyer raised an eyebrow, asked if Claire had pushed for any ownership. I said no, not yet. But I could feel it coming, like rain thick in the air before a storm. He nodded and drew up the papers. I didn't tell Claire immediately. I waited. I waited until we were 2 weeks away from the IPO announcement, until the valuation was firming up and press interest had started to flicker at the edges of our inboxes. And then I invited her to the launch party. Not the public one, not the glitzy, investor-filled gala planned for the big day, but the private team dinner, a low-lit gathering of the 8 people who had actually built WorkNest from scratch. She showed up in heels too high for the room and a blazer too crisp for a startup dinner, but she smiled and toasted and laughed like she belonged. When dessert came, I pulled out the envelope. She opened it, skimmed the top page, and then looked up at me like she'd just been slapped in the middle of a Broadway show. "You want me to sign this now?" "I think it's fair," I said calmly, but with steel in my voice. "You loaned me money and I'm repaying you. No strings, no ambiguity, clean break." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she smiled, too trained in polite society to make a scene. "I just didn't realize you thought of it like a transaction." "It was a transaction," I replied, "from the very beginning. I'm just putting it on paper." She signed, and for a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. The clean resolution, the button on a subplot I never wanted in the first place. But 2 days later, I got a call from a VC firm we'd passed on 6 months earlier. They wanted back in, full offer, double valuation. And they weren't just offering money, they wanted to help push the IPO early, aggressively, ahead of schedule. I called my co-founder. He was thrilled. I called the lawyers. They started drafting. I didn't call Claire. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I could already see the next party, the next room full of carefully composed smiles and hollow praise, and I knew if the launch was going to be mine, then it had to be only mine. No borrowed names, no family favors, no asterisk next to my success. And so, while the deal grew louder, I became quieter, planning, waiting. The clock was ticking, and I had just decided when it would strike. When you build something from the ground up, piece by piece, with no guarantees and nothing but your own stubborn belief to keep it going, there's this strange, surreal moment where the thing you created starts moving on its own, like a machine finally clicking into gear after years of grinding bolts and jammed parts. And suddenly, everyone around you, people who once didn't see the point, who questioned your choices, who called it a phase or a pipe dream, starts looking at you differently, not with admiration, but with confusion, like they're trying to reconcile the version of you they kept in their heads with the one now standing in front of them, the one they can no longer ignore or define on their terms. That was the energy in the room the morning of the IPO, as I stood backstage in a studio that looked far more glamorous on TV than it did in real life, surrounded by bright lights, camera operators, and a small army of financial reporters who had only just learned how to pronounce my last name. The night before, I hadn't slept. Not because I was nervous, not exactly, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the last 6 years in flashes. Burnt coffee in paper cups, voice notes sent at 2 in the morning, rejection emails stacked in my inbox like a graveyard of good intentions, moments of complete doubt followed by bursts of manic clarity. I remembered staring at a screen that wouldn't compile, breaking down in tears on my bathroom floor, then standing up and rewriting the entire back end with a vengeance only caffeine and desperation could produce. I remembered the way Mom sighed whenever I said I couldn't make it home for the holidays, the passive-aggressive text from Claire about missing another family moment, and the look on my ex-boyfriend's face when he realized I wasn't going to scale back after our engagement fell apart, like he was discovering a version of me he didn't want to meet. All of it led to this one morning, and I was determined to make every second count. The ceremony itself was brief, a tight production built for Wall Street watchers and media optics, and yet for me, it felt like walking into a stage where every person I'd ever tried to prove something to was silently watching, waiting to see if I'd stumble. I wore a black pantsuit with sharp shoulders and no jewelry, hair slicked back, no frills, no softness. I didn't want to look pretty. I wanted to look untouchable. The countdown began, and the bell rang, clear, loud, final. The screen lit up behind me, flashing the ticker symbol in bold, clean letters. WRKN. WorkNest was live. The valuation, even more aggressive than expected, spiked within minutes. Phones rang, applause erupted, cameras clicked like hailstones against a windshield. Back home, I knew the team was watching from the office, crammed around monitors with champagne and plastic cups, shouting and hugging and probably already halfway through the cake we'd ordered the night before. I imagined them screaming when the valuation hit $500 million. I imagined their jaws dropping as the shares jumped another 12%. But more than anything, I imagined the silence in my mother's living room, the way the TV flickered over her crystal vases and carefully arranged throw pillows, the way she probably held her glass just a little tighter as the screen showed her daughter, not the one she posted about, not the one she understood, but the one she had never really believed in, standing in front of the world with numbers even she couldn't dismiss. She arrived at the post-IPO press brunch 3 hours late, her entrance deliberate, theatrical, wearing a cream-colored coat far too expensive for the venue, and heels that clacked like a warning. She walked straight up to me, smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "So, does this mean you're rich now?" The people around us chuckled awkwardly, not quite sure if it was a joke or a jab. I smiled back, slow and cool, and replied, "It means I built something worth more than this building, and I'm just getting started." Claire came too, of course. She stuck close to the edge of the room, sipping wine, half smiling at anyone who approached. But when I walked over to her, she stiffened. I handed her a printed statement from the business account, loan repaid in full, plus interest. Her eyes scanned it, then flicked to mine, confused. "You didn't need to do this today," she said, voice low, like it hurt. "But I did," I replied, "because you need to know where the lines are. This isn't a family story anymore. This is my company." It should have ended there, clean and final, but nothing about family ever ends cleanly. Later that afternoon, just as I was finally about to sit down for a proper meal, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I stepped outside, the sounds of the restaurant muffled by the door closing behind me, and answered. The voice on the other end was calm, clipped, with just enough warmth to make you nervous. "Ms. Warren, this is Alan Brooks from Keystone Equity. We're very interested in acquiring a significant stake in WorkNest. We believe your tech is just scratching the surface of its commercial potential. We'd like to schedule a conversation about a possible offer. Would tomorrow work?" My stomach flipped, not with fear, but with the thrill of decision. This was the moment they all waited for, wasn't it? The cash out, the exit, the dream scenario. And yet something about it felt hollow, like being handed a crown you didn't ask for after winning a game you weren't even sure you wanted to play. I thanked him, told him I'd speak with my team, and ended the call, When I turned around, Mom was at the window, watching me, her face unreadable. Claire had disappeared. Inside, the party was still going, but for me, it had already shifted. Because now, the question wasn't whether I had won. It was whether I was ready to give any of it away. There's a peculiar stillness that follows the kind of climax most people fantasize about but rarely experience. A strange, suspended moment where the noise has finally died down, the spotlight has dimmed, and the champagne flutes have been cleared from the white tablecloths, leaving behind only the faint scent of citrus and ambition. I found myself in that stillness 3 nights after the IPO, sitting alone in my office, which until just a week prior had doubled as a glorified storage closet with a window that barely opened. The buzz of reporters, the onslaught of emails, the investor voicemails promising once-in-a-lifetime synergies, all of it had quieted into the kind of silence that feels less like peace and more like the space between 2 heartbeats, the moment before you decide whether to jump or stay rooted to the ledge. I had the papers in front of me, the formal offer from Keystone Equity, presented in crisp legal prose and stamped with the kind of valuation that makes people quit their jobs, buy a yacht, and never touch a keyboard again. 40% of WorkNest in exchange for an immediate payout large enough to make even the most frugal person consider a private island. My co-founder, Will, had been over the moon, his excitement barely contained in our earlier meeting, where he ran through the numbers with the fervor of someone who'd spent most of his adult life surviving off instant noodles and unpaid internships. "We could do anything with this," he'd said, eyes gleaming. "We'd never have to beg for runway again. We'd be free." But even as he said it, something about the word free made my jaw tighten. Because the kind of freedom he meant, the kind you buy with shares and press releases, wasn't the freedom I'd spent the last 6 years chasing. It wasn't the freedom I'd fought for when I turned down safe salaries, ignored well-meaning advice, and watched relationship after relationship falter. Under the weight of my focus, the freedom I wanted wasn't about escape. It was about control, about building something that didn't require validation, didn't bend to the whims of boardrooms filled with men who couldn't pronounce my company's name 6 months ago. And so I sat there, staring at the offer, hearing the clock on the wall tick louder with every second, until I finally stood up, walked over to the window, and stared down at the city below, its lights blinking like a giant motherboard, its endless movement both inspiring and exhausting. I thought about my mother, who had called earlier that day to ask if I'd made a decision, her voice carefully casual, as though she hadn't already spoken to Claire about the offer, as though she hadn't already decided that selling was the responsible, respectable, obvious thing to do. "It's a lot of money, Natalie," she'd said, as if I hadn't read the damn number a dozen times. "You could finally take a break, buy a home, maybe think about the future." I almost laughed when she said it, because what she really meant, what she always meant, was that I could finally be normal, finally fit into the version of success she understood, the kind with real estate portfolios and holiday cards with matching sweaters. Claire had sent a message too, shorter, more direct. "Don't let this be about proving something. Just take the win." As if that's all this ever was to her. A game, a trophy, a point scored in a rivalry I never agreed to, but was forced into the moment she became Mom's favorite version of a daughter. That night, I hosted a private dinner with the core team, the engineers, the ops lead, our very first intern, who now ran marketing, and Will, of course, still glowing from the numbers. I didn't tell them what I'd decided until after dessert, when the laughter had faded into quiet satisfaction and the wine had worked its way through everyone's nerves. I stood, raised my glass, and said, "I turned them down." The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, but not angry. It was surprise, mixed with something else, respect maybe, or the beginning of it. "We're not cashing out," I continued. "Not yet. We built this company to solve a problem, not to sell the solution to someone who'll dilute it with shortcuts. We're going to keep going, stay lean, and build it right, on our terms." Will didn't say anything for a long time, just nodded slowly and exhaled through his nose, like someone letting go of a version of the future they weren't quite ready to admit they didn't believe in. No one cheered, no one argued. They just sat with it, the reality of it, and then one by one, they raised their glasses too. The next morning, I got another call, from a journalist this time, asking for a quote on why I'd declined a buyout offer that most founders would have leapt at. I gave them the only answer that felt true. Because I didn't build WorkNest to sell it, I built it to matter. The article ran 2 days later. Some people praised the decision, others called it naive. I didn't read the comments. I saw Mom again a week later at a family dinner Claire insisted we have. Something about reconnecting now that things have calmed down. The food was perfect, the wine was expensive, and the air was thick with unspoken opinions. When Mom asked carefully what the next step was, I told her I was meeting with a nonprofit to discuss partnerships for remote work accessibility. She smiled, tight-lipped, and said, "Well, just make sure you're not burning out. Success is great, but it doesn't keep you warm at night." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I knew nothing I said would change the lens through which she viewed my life. She saw risk where I saw purpose. She saw noise where I saw momentum, and that was fine. I had stopped needing her validation the moment I heard that IPO bell ring. Later that night, standing alone on the rooftop of my building with a cup of tea instead of champagne, I watched the city lights shimmer against the dark, the same way they did that night 6 years ago when I first scribbled the idea for WorkNest in a coffee-stained notebook. I thought about everything I'd lost along the way, relationships, time, pieces of myself I might never get back, and I thought about everything I'd gained: clarity, ownership, defiance, and a future no one else could script. My phone buzzed beside me. I glanced at the screen, no name, just a text. "Are you sure?" I didn't respond. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some decisions are the answer,